It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon, Opperman Report Patreon. Everything you hear Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio, you could find at the Opperman Report Patreon with all the ads and the commercials cut out, so you'll never miss a show. If you go to our archives at Spreaker.com, you'll find our guest today. We did a previous show with him many, many years ago, before Trump was even elected. David Cay Johnston. That's David Cay Johnston. You can find him on Twitter by that same name, David Cay Johnston. In fact, if you just put in David Cay, C-A-Y, it'll pop right up. Newest book out there is called The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. Mr. David Cay Johnston, are you there?
I sure am.
Hey, thank you so much. Hey, before we get into the new book, and I know we want to talk about that helicopter pilot too as well, remind the audience, who is David Cay Johnston? If they saw your face, they'd recognize you immediately from MSNBC and CNN. You're all over the place. But remind them.
Well, I've been a reporter since the mid-1960s. As a teenager, I was a front-page staff writer at the San Jose Mercury, now the sixth largest newspaper in America. And I worked for the Detroit Free Press, the LA Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the New York Times. And I'm a former president of Investigative Reporters and Editors, which is our professional organization with about 6,000 members. I've written 8 books, 4 of which were New York Times bestsellers, and 2 of them were international bestsellers. My career has focused primarily on economics, taxes, CEO pay, but I was the first journalist to seriously investigate the Los Angeles Police Department more than 40 years ago, and I am the only journalist in American history whose work caused a broadcast chain to shut down and go out of business because they were using news manipulations and news blackouts to further the interests of the controlling owner.
Which chain was that?
It's called Gross Telecasting, and according to Forbes magazine, they had the second highest profit rate of any publicly owned broadcaster in America. TV stations back then were typically making about a 17% profit on sales. This guy was making 50%, and his AM radio stations, 90% profit margin. Whoa. 90 cents out of every dollar that came in. Typical business, it would be the opposite. You'd keep 10 cents, and you'd have 90 cents in operating expenses. And it took 3 years of my reporting and 11 years of litigation, but eventually he was forced off the air as a result of my exposés, and that coverage brought about a significant change in American journalism. Up until that time, it was unusual and rare for news organizations to report on misconduct by other news organizations. Now we have a show on NPR every week. We have a show on Fox. There used to be one on CNBC. There's a whole team of reporters at the New York Times who just cover the news business. And not long after I started covering this in 1973 in the Detroit Free Press, the Los Angeles Times, where I later worked, set up the pioneering first full-time beat covering the news itself as a news story.
And you won the Pulitzer Prize in 2001.
Yes, that was for my exposing loopholes and inequities in the tax system, and I was a finalist 3 other times. There are 3 finalists every year, and the citation cited my, quote, exquisite command of complicated U.S. tax laws, close quote. And while I am not a lawyer, I have been for the last 15 years on the faculty at Syracuse University College of Law, and for 8 of those years at the graduate business school there, where I've taught law, even though I'm not a lawyer.
And you got 8 kids.
All long grown and gone.
Well, yeah. And I guess with 8 of them, you don't have that empty nest, right? Because grandkids come along, they come and go. Now, you mentioned this litigation you had when you were reporting on this radio company here, but you had litigation, too, in Trump, the making of Donald Trump, right?
Well, Donald has called me at home many times since we first met in May of 1988, threatening to sue me. He has hired some of the most highly paid and excellent litigators in the world to try to get me fired. But in 35 years, he's never been able to show a single error. He's never gotten a single correction. The person he sued was my colleague at the New York Times, Tim O'Brien, who wrote a biography of Trump called Trumpland. It's a very revealing, excellent book. And when he was doing the book, I said to Tim, who's now at Bloomberg, don't put an exact figure on Trump's wealth. He'll sue you. I had revealed back in 1990 that Trump was a complete fraud. He claimed to have billions of dollars. He actually had a negative net worth, or as I wrote in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and we ran this on page 1 above the masthead. That's the best play you can get, right? The very top of the paper, above the name of the paper. You are probably worth more than Donald Trump.
Right.
And he did sue Tim O'Brien and lost. But the litigation, because thank God Tim didn't listen to my advice, brought out all sorts of important things about Donald Trump we didn't know.
Now, what about when they have something that comes out like this Letitia James, this New York City lawsuit for $250 million against Trump Organization? Do they come to David Cay Johnston for consultation?
No.
Really?
Not least. I mean, there are cases out there where my work is cited in official proceedings, but no. And this is, Letitia James is the elected Attorney General of New York State. The case is in Manhattan, but it is a state government civil fraud case. It is not at all surprising that she's brought this case. I and others have written about Donald's inflating the value of his assets and understating him for years, and I'll give you 2 simple examples. Donald owns a roughly 20-acre estate in Westchester County. That's the wealthy county just up the Hudson River from Manhattan, with a mansion on it. He has claimed for tax purposes that it's worth less than $20 million. On his financial statement, he's listed its value as being as high as $291 million. That's almost 15 times as much. And he based that on, false representations that are very obvious, but second, that he could divide the place up and sell a whole bunch of mini mansions. Well, he can't do that. The authorities have made it clear he can't do that. So to claim you have a value that you don't, that's a fraud. Nearby, he has his Trump Westminster, I think that's what it's called. Anyhow, it's the golf course in Westchester County, the Trump Westchester National Golf Course, I think he calls it. It has a 90-foot high waterfall and a clubhouse that, according to Trump, is larger than an acre, over 44,000 square feet. He claims it's only worth $1.3 million. A house on the fairway, a large house, will run upwards of $1 million there, just a house. So it's absurd for him to claim it's only worth $1.3 million. And on his presidential disclosure forms, he's checked the box for more than $50 million, and in numerous interviews, he has said it's worth more than $100 million. Now, I once disputed the property taxes on my home where I live in Rochester, New York. The difference between me and the local assessor was 10% of the value of the house, about $30,000. If I say the house is worth $300,000 or $330,000 and the government says it's worth the opposite, that's just a difference of opinion about real estate values, which after all aren't like the stock market. They're not liquid. But if you claim something is worth $1.3 million in one piece of paperwork and over $100 million at the same time, that's just fraud, plain old-fashioned fraud.
But the thing is, okay, and I get grief on this all the time because when I talk about Mar-a-Lago, okay, and the Palm Beach County in 2011 said it was worth $18 million. They assessed it at $18 million because of deed restrictions and all kinds. You have to pay back all those memberships and stuff. And I think it was 2020 that said it was $28 million. But the Trump team can get on Twitter and say, they're trying to say that Mar-a-Lago is only worth $18 million. That's ridiculous. Look at the house next door. Explain that to my audience, please.
Sure. Well, Donald has claimed that Mar-a-Lago is worth as much as $500 million. Yet he has gone to the local tax authorities and saying, oh, no, it's only worth, I think 18 million was his number, but in that range, $20 million. Again, this is just fraud. First of all, he doesn't have any rights to redevelop the property. It's not that large. And it's typical of what Donald does. By the way, when Donald bought this property, he told everybody, he wrote in his books, I paid cash for it. Well, I have in my files a document from Chase Bank in which the banker writes to Donald, attached are all of the documents for your $10 million mortgage on Mar-a-Lago, which he bought for $8 million as the cost, and took $2 million to pocket. And we want to reassure you, we will not file this mortgage anywhere. New York state law requires that all New York issued mortgages be recorded, even if the mortgage is on a house in Florida. It was a violation of the law to not file this mortgage. And it's indicative of how Trump gets people to commit crimes, which this could have been prosecuted as a crime, to lie, to falsify the public record. And for him to say, gee, my house in Mar-a-Lago is only worth $20 million, tax authorities, and then argue that it's worth $500 million in his civil fraud case underway right now is a further example of that's fraud. If he said it's worth $25 million or $30 million, that's not fraud. But the $500 million, that's fraud.
But now he's already lost. It's been adjudicated that this is fraud. Okay, in New York State,
there are 7 charges, Ed.
Right.
On the charge of persistently committing fraud, the judge has already ruled he committed fraud. There are 6 additional civil. These are all civil, not criminal. 6 additional civil charges, each of which requires proving intent. Some crimes you have to prove intent. Some you don't have to. They are per se, if you do them, crimes or wrongs. And so the trial is about 2 things. In the other 6 examples was this deliberate knowing fraud. I think you're going to find the judge will rule it was. And then how much in damages do you owe? And the legal principle here is, imagine, Ed, you work for a business that shuts down on Friday night at 5 o'clock and reopens Monday morning at 9. You take a $100 bill out of the till. You go to the casino, you gamble, you get lucky, you win a lot of money. You go put the $100 back and you put your $1,000 of winnings in your pocket. Well, A, you committed a crime, even though it had no material impact on the business. You put the money back before it reopened. You still committed a felony. And second, the $1,000 you won is not your money. It is what the law calls ill-got gains. And in the Donald Trump civil fraud trial in New York, the issue is if you lied and committed fraud to get loans and tax breaks and insurance benefits, and you profited from that, you must disgorge. You must give up all the profits that you made from that, because you're not entitled to them. Those are the proceeds of wrongful conduct.
But David Cay Johnston, if I read the paper today, if I'm playing devil's advocate, if I read the paper today, I'm seeing, being reported with a straight face, that the executive from Deutsche Bank claims, oh no, we made a lot of money with Donald Trump and we wanted to make more money from him. This Rosemary Vrablic?
Right. Right. And here's the problem with her testimony. I don't doubt for a moment that Deutsche Bank made money off of the loans to Donald Trump. But once again, this is ill-got gains. Banks do not have an unlimited capacity to make a loan. So if they make a $100 million loan to Donald Trump, when he wasn't qualified for that loan, when they were violating banking regulations. And after all, nobody has a right to be a bank. A bank is an artificial creature authorized by state law and which must obey the laws of the state and, if in the appropriate, federal government in order to do business. So they took unwarranted risk, and also it meant there was, in my $100 million example, there wasn't $100 million available to loan to people who were legitimate borrowers. This is not a victimless crime. The bank was at risk of losing money if Trump didn't perform. And remember, back in 1989-90, he didn't pay back almost $1 billion of the $3 billion he had borrowed from a variety of banks, about 75 of them. And secondly, the bank's profit would have been higher had it charged an interest rate appropriate to the risk. Banks charge based on risk. So a number of years ago, I wrote about how, because I am a nutcase about paying my bills and not having debt, during the 2008 financial crisis, when there were all these stories saying, there's no lending going on, the whole banking business is shut down, I one day got 10 pitches to borrow money for 2% for a year. That was less than the rate of inflation. That's like a free gift of money. Whereas if you're my brother, who was literally a ditch digger and a security guard and jobs like that, who had a terrible credit rating, he would send me these flyers he would get offering to loan him money at more than 30% interest. So it's important to keep in mind here that banks measure risk. And if they have mismeasured Donald Trump's risk because he committed fraud by claiming he had more financial muscle than he did, then the whole system is put at risk by this. And guess what? We saw that in 2008 when the whole economy collapsed. And by some measures, the 2008 collapse of the American economy was worse than the 1929 collapse.
Let me ask you a question, too. That this Rosemary Vrablic, isn't there some type of conflict of interest, too, that she has some kind of business relationship with Jared?
Oh, sure. No. The high-level banking in America is rife with corruption. And this is, if you read the New York Times during the years I was there, not just my work, but that of other reporters, if you read Forbes magazine, you would know this. David Enrich, E-N-R-I-C-H, is the editor in charge of business investigations at the New York Times. And he wrote a terrific book called, I think it was called Dark Towers. It is his book on Deutsche Bank and its lending activities. Deutsche Bank is essentially a U.S., German, and other governments licensed criminal organization. It is the second largest place for money laundering by Russian criminals in the world. The only bigger place is the Bank of Cyprus. And by the way, when the CEO of Deutsche Bank was forced out because of all the corruption, what did he do for a new job? Well, he went and became the head of the Bank of Cyprus, whose board vice chairman became Donald Trump's commerce secretary, and whose other board vice chairman was Vladimir Putin's appointee. So, surprise, surprise, Deutsche Bank and the Bank of Cyprus are involved in all sorts of criminal activity, helping the newer oligarchs in Russia, who are Vladimir Putin's incredibly well-financed criminal gang. There's two groups of oligarchs in Russia, the 1989-90 oligarchs, and then the ones when Putin came to power at the turn of the century. Those are the ones we need to be most worried about, and they're the ones who use Deutsche Bank and the Bank of Cyprus.
Yeah, they also seem to be very liberal in spreading their money around here in U.S. politics.
I wouldn't say they're liberal about it. I would say that they're very smart and strategic. Right. And this is not a new thing, Ed. Back in the 1970s, I exposed how the government in South Africa, when we had apartheid, the white racist government was influencing American politics. They tried to buy the Washington Star newspaper. When that failed, they bought the Sacramento Union, which was indicative of how stupid they were, because the Sacramento Union which was an afternoon newspaper, has no political influence at all, whereas the Washington Star had a lot. They put money into people to oppose a senator from Iowa. They created political parties in Norway and France by funding them and got people elected to the legislatures there. A whole bunch of things that I wrote about back then about the South African government's agents influencing American politics and those of other governments. And we've now seen that the Russians, we know clearly from the evidence the Russians were doing this in the 2016 election. We know that there's been cyber interference by the Iranians, the North Koreans, and others. And this is a real national security problem with it. We need to keep foreign governments out of our elections. And we've had, other cases. There was a guy who was an agent of the Chinese government who gave money to Hillary Clinton. As soon as that became public, they gave it right back or gave it away, disgorged it. But we've had politicians in this country who've insisted that, no, it's perfectly okay to take money from foreign governments in American elections. That's a felony to take money under those circumstances.
I'm thinking back to the first time you were on the show. It was before Trump was elected. There's been a coup. We have this George Santos character with the OnlyFans. How are you feeling these days? Are you feeling secure in our system around us?
Well, if Donald gets back into office, I will be one of the people he will go after. I mean, he said he hates me more than any other journalist in the world, though I suspect I'm no longer near the top of his list. But, he's declared he will be our dictator. He's also revealed, of course, how stupid he is. A couple of days ago, I tweeted about how he said he was going to order the FCC to go after MSNBC. Well, the Federal Communications Commission regulates over-the-air broadcasters like the broadcast company that Gross Telecasting that I got to shut down and go out of business. But MSNBC is done over cable. There is no federal regulation of cable. And that Donald doesn't know this is just indicative of what he doesn't know. But he's clearly lining up a whole group of lawyers and policy people who intend to destroy the America we've known, to round up large numbers of people and put them into concentration camps. He's declared his intention to do that, so there's no dispute about his intent. And he won't ever leave the White House. I mean, if you want to end American democracy and you think we'd be better off under a dictator, especially a dictator who's as badly misinformed and mentally troubled as Donald, you should vote for him. But if you like your liberty and you'd like to see America better in the future, then you need to make sure he doesn't get to the White House.
I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, I'm terrified, too, of what could possibly happen to me. But the thing is, do you believe he's competent to stand trial? Is he competent to assist in his defense at this trial?
He's more than competent to do so. The standard for competency to stand trial is, do you know right from wrong, and are you aware of the proceedings around you? Clearly, he's aware of the proceedings, and he understands what they are, and he's testified to that. And his statements make it clear. He knows that he has got 4 criminal cases with 91 charges and this civil case, plus a whole bunch of other civil cases. The other one is, are you mentally competent? Do you know right from wrong? One of my high school classmates murdered her next door neighbor who came from East Germany because she was convinced he was some German spy spying on her. And the Phoenix prosecutor, 2 days after her arrest, announced that they were not going to prosecute her. They were going to send her to a mental hospital. If you cut somebody's head off because you think it's a head of lettuce, then we're not going to try you. You're crazy. If you are so mentally limited that you can't describe and name people around you, then we're not supposed to try you because you don't have what's called mens rea, criminal intent, M-E-N-S-R-E-A, mens rea. Donald has mens rea. Donald has demonstrated repeatedly that he knows he's lying about things, he hides things, he pays people off. All of those are badges of fraud.
But David, is he able to assist in his defense? It seems like these attorneys are bending over this bizarre mistrial motion. Man, have you ever seen anything like that before in your life?
No.
Yeah.
what Donald's doing, I think, and his lawyers are doing, and I'm not the only person saying this.
Okay.
There are actual experienced trial lawyers who are saying this, whereas I just teach law. They all are saying the same thing. All of us are saying the same thing. These are motions that are intended for his base. These are political moves. They have nothing to do with the legal proceedings against him. And Donald knows what he's doing. I mean, Donald is a fraud in that, he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 or 23 subjects, depending on how you read one of his comments.
And golf.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I don't know anybody who could be the world's greatest expert on more than one subject, but one of his subjects is tax. And Donald claims not only he's the world's greatest expert, I am the greatest expert in all history about tax. Well, okay, I'm a world-recognized expert on tax. My next book will propose a much better, much simplified federal tax system that every expert has gone over it says would work. They just believe that the people and corporations which literally turn their taxes into profit centers, something I proved 25 years ago, that they will kill this by telling everybody it's a fraud. Now, to understand tax, I had to learn accounting. I learned it well enough that I taught at a graduate school of accounting for 8 years, the Whitman School at Syracuse University. And Donald, under oath, in the lawsuit against my former colleague Tim O'Brien, who had identified Donald's net worth as somewhere around 140 to 160 million after Donald showed him tax returns and other financial statements. Donald, in that case, was asked, so what do you know about accounting, Mr. Trump? I don't know anything about accounting. You don't know anything about accounting? I don't know anything. I leave that to the bean counters. You sure about that? I mean, have you studied accounting? I haven't studied accounting at all. So you understand the rules, the basic rules, perhaps? No, I don't understand anything about accounting. You cannot know tax if you don't know accounting. So ipso facto, you cannot be the greatest expert in all time on taxes if you don't know anything about accounting.
Well, he did go to the Wharton School. Did he?
Well,
how did he get through there?
He sort of went to the Wharton School.
Ooh.
During the Vietnam War, lots of rich boys got deferments by going to college. Two rich boys who went and joined the military and volunteered, in one case demanded to be sent to the Vietnam War, were John Kerry and Al Gore. But Donald was one of those rich boys who got a deferment first for college, and then Donald's father arranged for a podiatrist who rented space from Donald's father, Fred Trump, that's his office was in a rented space, to write a report that Donald had a bone spur. Donald can't remember which foot has the bone spur. In other words,
he was a really good podiatrist.
It's just a made-up story to keep him from going there. And I have interviewed students, including some women he asked out when he went to Wharton, and he was rarely seen in class. He got credit for working on real estate deals with his father in New York and Cincinnati. And Donald has claimed he graduated at the top of his class. There is a list of, who the honor students were. And, by the way, he makes you think by saying the Wharton School that he went to the graduate school at Wharton, which is a finance school. It's not a managerial school. It's a finance school. Well, he didn't. He went to the undergraduate program at that college, not the graduate program. And there is no record anybody can find anywhere of any distinguished scholarship, despite his claiming he was at the very top of his class. There is one professor who, before he died, who said publicly that Trump was, and I'll leave out the expletives, dumbest student he ever had.
I hope the audience appreciates we have David Cay Johnston, who knows this stuff by memory, off the top of his head. Check out the latest book, The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America, Enriched Himself and His Family, The Making of Donald Trump. This is the Bible of Trump expose. David Cay Johnston. You can find him on Twitter. Just put in David, C-A-Y. It'll pop right up, David Cay Johnston. Mr. Johnston, the back to Letitia James, New York State. They're applying a consumer law against Mr. Trump, where normally it would be the other way around. It would be the bank would be the defendant in this case, and the citizen would be the consumer, right? What do you think of an appellate victory on that?
I don't see. Okay, let me back up.
Go ahead.
The findings of fact by Judge Engoron are not subject to appeal. The trier of the case is the finder of fact, and unless they can show that, he wrote in his findings of fact something that's blatantly untrue, the sun rises in the west sort of thing, there's no appeal from that. New York has a very powerful business records law called the Martin Act. Because New York is such an important business center, it's always been important that it have very strong rules about falsifying business records. Hence the Martin Act. And the use of consumer law in this case, we think of it as designed to protect you and me as retail consumers, but in fact, it's designed to protect anybody doing business with you. And I don't think there's anything unusual about the application of this law. Trump's lawyers are doing what he wants. Right. They're filing frivolous complaints. And one of the things the audience may not know is when you hear frivolous in a legal context, if a judge says that's a frivolous complaint, if the Internal Revenue Service sends you back a letter after you contacted them and said, your argument is frivolous, that is the equivalent of a judge or a government official telling you that your argument has as much weight as a drunk in a bar. It is totally and utterly without merit, and you're not going to get it considered. Donald knows what's going to happen eventually. His effort here is to delay till after the November 24 election. If he then is back in the White House, he can immediately stop the two federal cases, and he can go to court saying, well, I'm president. You can't make me continue to go with these state proceedings because they'll interfere with my ability to conduct the nation's business. And one other little thing, which I was the first person in America to point out, and of course now you'll hear it all the time, assume Donald Trump were convicted and put in a Georgia prison or a New York prison. Nothing in the Constitution would prevent an incarcerated president from fulfilling his duties. He'd be in prison, but he could, from the prison, be president of the United States unless Congress came to its senses and impeached him in the House, and 2/3 of the senators voted to remove him, which I would expect they would do in that insane prospect.
You really think so, man? In the day of George Santos and Matt Gaetz, you really think so? You're a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, if he were actually incarcerated. One of the things the polls are showing, and I am not a big believer in polls, Ed. When I was very young, I used to make extra money doing polling on the side. So I have a intuitive understanding of how these things work. Polling results now, less than 1 in 100 people answer the phone call and agree to take the poll questions. That is an inherently biased example, and I'm not the one saying that. John Geraci, the pollster who wrote the book Polarized with 2 L's, he says that in his book. And told me that personally at a dinner recently. Also, the poll questions are based on landlines, and young people, very few of them have landlines. Even very few people my age have landlines. I'm going to turn 75 Christmas Eve.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Be very wary of the poll results. But when you ask the direct question, you're going to vote for Biden or Trump, Trump does very well. When you ask, if Donald Trump is convicted of any crime, how will that affect your vote? His support falls away. When they ask sideways questions, then they get very different results that are not good for Trump. And by the way, all leading polls are completely published. You can go and it's a matter of honor in the polling business and integrity. All your questions are there. I used to write a column every now and then after I left the New York Times about the Fox News annual poll on religion because it was fascinating. And one of the things I would point out is that year after year after year, it would show that about 24% of Americans believe in warlocks, that is, a male witch. Right. 28% believe in witches. Now, beyond the insanity of thinking there are witches and warlocks, if you think that if more people think there are witches than think there are warlocks, that also tells you something about misogyny.
I love it, man. I love it. No, real quick, back to Letitia James again. If he does lose, so let's say they hit him with the $250 million, and there's all kind of restrictions on his licensing. What is that? What happens to Trump then? Puts him out of business?
Well, yes. Judge Engoron canceled all of his business licenses. You know, we're New York State, so we call them certificates. We have all sorts of oddities in our law. But he canceled all of his business certificates. You cannot conduct business without a certificate unless you're a sole proprietor. So, you know, when I write articles or give speeches or write books, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't need anybody's permission to do what I do. But if I incorporated myself, now I have to obey the government rules. Donald has more than 500 separate business entities. All of their licenses were revoked. The Trump Organization is the top entity, and all these others are effectively subsidiaries underneath. And the judge took away all those licenses, so he cannot conduct business. Now, an appeals court has stayed that is, reinstated the licenses until the case is over. But assuming Donald loses the case, and ignoring his efforts that you can be certain will occur to appeal and delay, what will follow is the business licenses will be revoked, so he will not have an ability to do any business. A monitor will be appointed by the judge to oversee the sale of Trump properties, to first raise the money to pay what's owed the state, the disgorgement of his ill-got profits plus any fines and penalties. And then the creditors will get paid. If you have a mortgage on a Trump building or something else, you're next in line. And the last person to get paid will be Donald Trump and the Trump Organization. The court monitor can sell any of the Trump properties. So Donald owns his 3-story apartment in Trump Tower. He owns the office space that's rented out, and he owns the retail space at the ground floor. He doesn't own the whole building, but he owns those parts of it. Those can all be sold. His golf courses can be sold. Mar-a-Lago can be sold. His 30-year-old Boeing 757 jet and his, I think, more than 30-year-old little Citation jet, his 2 helicopters, they can be sold. Now, Donald can bid to buy them if he has the money, which I don't think he will have, depending on the size of the damages and the money at the sales. And these will not be carefully orchestrated sales to get maximum value. The reality is these will be fire sale prices. They'll be big bargains. Donald could end up being left with nothing but his presidential pardon and his union pardon, because he belonged to a union for his TV show.
Pension, you mean?
And he'd end up with that's it, nothing else.
You mean pension, not pardon, right?
Yeah.
Right? You mean his presidential?
Say it one more time.
You mean his presidential pension and his union pension, not his.
Yes.
You said pardon. That's a Freudian slip there, my friend.
Sorry, old age. His 2 pensions, and he's not taking Social Security. He can apply for Social Security, right, and get whatever he's entitled to there. He didn't take significant salary, so he may have a very small payment. We don't have his whole career work history. But he could literally be stripped down to that. And, of course, there are all sorts of other cases out there. He owes $5 million to the woman that the judge found that he raped, the writer E. Jean Carroll. She has a second case against him where he's going to owe more damages. And he's being sued by a variety of other people who, not all of whom, but some of whom have a very good prospect of prevailing against him. So I think Donald Trump's going to spend the rest of his life in litigation, and he's going to see his financial muscle shrivel rapidly.
Okay, David Cay Johnston, there is currently a court monitoring, and he needs to seek approval before doing any financial transactions in New York State, but he just transferred $40 million.
Right. That is indicative of Donald's utter disregard for law. The transfers were discovered in an audit. I'm shocked, frankly, that Judge Barbara Jones, who is the monitor, hadn't instructed all of the banks that you're not to make any movements of larger than $5 million without notifying me, and you were to notify me of any movement of more than $1 million. I think the monitor's powers need to be increased. Donald can be sanctioned for this, fined for it. His side of the story is, well, we had to do this to pay a $29 million tax bill. We'll see if that's actually the case. But Donald doesn't obey rules. I mean, this is a man who plied children, who I named in one of my books because they were in the public record, 12, 13, and 14-year-old rich kids with money to gamble. He got them liquor and limousines and hotel suites. And when I talked to him about it, he didn't think there was anything wrong with that. This is a man who cheated novice roulette players at the Trump Castle Casino. The only known case of any casino in Atlantic City cheating players was at Trump Castle. This is a man who was involved for a decade up to his eyeballs with one of the most notorious and biggest drug traffickers in America, Joseph Wexelbaum. And, you know, if you were to get Donald Ed on this show and ask him about it, he'd go, what? Oh, I don't remember any of that. It was so long ago. If you'd gotten him at the time, he would have said, well, I didn't do anything wrong, which is not true.
I have one last question, then I want to get into Wexelbaum. Okay, you said that this is based on New York State financial transaction laws. What about Stormy Daniels' case coming up?
Well, the Stormy Daniels case of paying hush money has not been prosecuted by the Southern District of New York, right. The federal prosecutors who, during the Trump administration, prosecuted his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who went to prison. They have a slam dunk case there, but for whatever reason, the Justice Department has decided not to prosecute that case, probably because they think it's small potatoes compared to the other offenses. And Stormy Daniels has her own case against Trump. I don't know enough about the merits of that and the way it's framed as to whether she will succeed.
Me and David Cay Johnston reconnected recently. The 75-year-old man and the 61-year-old man reunited over TikTok. Okay, I had mentioned the Joe Wexelbaum helicopter pilot drug dealer on my Ed Opperman TikTok channel, and I suppose David Cay Johnston watches TikTok. Mr. Johnston, tell us a story about Joe Wexelbaum, the pilot.
Sure. Well, if you own a casino in Atlantic City, you needed a fleet of helicopters and you needed some small jets on charter to bring in high rollers. And the other big casinos, Caesars, Bally's, Harrah's, they hired reputable helicopter firms to fly people from New York City and Boston and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Washington to the casinos. Donald turned to a very sketchy outfit that got most of its capital from a politically connected deal with the state government. They got their money from the taxpayers, not from investors. They had a sketchy record in other areas as well and went through several bankruptcies and reorganizations. And one of the heads of this company was a guy named Joseph Wexelbaum. He was a twice convicted felon and a mob associate. He's not technically a mafioso because he's not a Sicilian, but he was deeply involved in frauds and other businesses with the mafia. And Wexelbaum managed not only the helicopters for Donald's high rollers, but the Ivana, which is what Donald called his Euro helicopter. And he piloted that helicopter when Donald was in it, when Ivana was in it, and when Donald's sister was in it, federal judge Marianne Trump Barry and her husband, John Barry, who was a lawyer for the Trump casinos, rode in Wexelbaum helicopters from northern New Jersey to the casinos often, several times a week. So Wexelbaum gets caught by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. He has been importing tons of cocaine and marijuana from Colombia to North Miami, Florida, where he had a used car dealership, and then having mules drive the drugs north to Cincinnati to distribute them. When he gets caught as a two-time felon looking at a third strike, he writes a written confession. He confesses to everything, or certainly enough that there's no question he did this. He even admits to personally handling the drugs, which is unusual. Pablo Escobar did not load drugs into boats or airplanes to send them to America. Just as the chairman of ExxonMobil doesn't personally go pump gasoline. But Joe Exelbaum did. And he pleads guilty, which makes sense. And then he asked the court to transfer his case for sentencing only to either Miami or New York City because he has a home in each place. Somehow the case instead ends up in New Jersey, where no crime is alleged to have occurred, and in the federal courtroom of Judge Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's sister. Now, after a couple of weeks, Donald's sister recuses herself. That's a legal term for she removes herself from the case. And the case is then transferred to the person who became her closest and best friend and frequent luncheon companion on the court.
Wow.
The mules, the people who all they did was drive the drugs. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They're criminals. But the people who just drove the drugs from Miami to Ohio, they got 20 years each. What did Joe get? Well, Joe Exelbaum got 36 months. He served only 18. Wow. He served them in the Metropolitan Correctional Facility, which is less like a jail and more like a hotel with a lock on the door to keep you from leaving the room. He had a telephone and internet access and all of that stuff, and an air-conditioned room. When he was about to get out, he had to have a job, and he had to pay a $30,000 fine. Well, he said he was going back to work for Donald Trump. Why would Donald Trump, a casino owner, hire an admitted national class drug trafficker, particularly when his casino license says you're not to consort with criminals? Why would you hire him back as your consultant on helicopters? Joe made 3 payments of $200 each on his federal fine and then stopped paying, saying, I don't have any money. But funny thing, Joe and his girlfriend ended up in a $2.4 million double apartment in Trump Tower that got a mortgage with no underwriting. That is, when you seek a mortgage, you go to the bank and you say, well, here's my tax returns, here's my paychecks, here's my friend saying I'm an honest person. None of that. A bank just gave a mortgage for this property. And he went on with his life. Well, Donald wrote a letter to a judge in this case. And ostensibly, the letter is, you shouldn't be harsh with this man. He's a stand-up guy. Donald called him a credit to the community. But if you read the letter, which is quoted in my book, The Making of Donald Trump, and which you can find online if you want to do a search. It was originally put out by the Smoking Gun website, and a lot of Trump documents at the Smoking Gun. You read that letter, you'll realize the letter is not written to the judge. The letter is written to Joe. And what it says is, hey, partner, keep your mouth shut and I will take care of you. Just take the weight, go to jail, keep your mouth shut, I will take care of you. And indeed, that's what Donald did. Almost nobody knows this because my former newspaper, the New York Times, wouldn't touch it. They just wouldn't touch it. The reason I was told is it was too old. It was ancient history. It happened, he wrote the letter in 87 or 88. Ancient history. Never mind the fact that the Times, when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump in 2016, devoted a third of the front page to a profile of her, a profile about what she was doing in the 70s, which would be even more ancient history. You there, Ed?
Yeah, I'm here. The importance of having David Cay Johnston come back on this show, because no one is talking.
Ed, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me? I can hear you fine. Can you hear me, David?
Okay, where did we lose each
No,
other?
I could hear you fine the whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear back from you, so I figured it had gone bad.
No. But the thing is, we're almost over anyway, out of time. But the importance of having David Cay Johnston on the show is that the only way, if you look up this Joseph Wexelbaum, the only place you'll find it is connected to David. He's the only one talking about this. Okay.
Well, Wayne Barrett, the great Wayne Barrett, actually broke the story back in 1992, and I wrote about it in the Philadelphia Inquirer. But yeah, nobody else has touched this thing, and I just find it astonishing that people, they don't know about the children gambling, they don't know about cheating customers in the casinos, they don't know.
Yeah, children gambling is a new one on me too. Are you there?
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, good. Real quick.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Roy Cohen.
It's just astonishing. Sorry.
No. Okay, let me just real quick because we only got a couple of minutes. Roy Cohen is purportedly the one who got the sister Mary Trump, the sister Trump Barry, the federal judgeship. Any connections between Roy Cohen and the organized crime families that Joe Wexelbaum was involved in?
Yes, the notorious Roy Cohen, who did get Marianne Trump Barry her federal judgeship by calling up Reagan personally and saying, please do me a favor. He represented all sorts of mobsters, including the number 2 person in the Gambino crime family. Some people will tell you he was actually number 1. He represented people in the Genovese family.
Aiello Della Croce? Are you there? Hey, David.
Yeah, let's try that again.
Real quick, was it Aiello Della Croce who Cohen was representing, the second in command at Gambino?
No, it was Paul Castellano.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not Castellano. I'm sorry, no. I'm sorry. I can tell you the name off air. I just don't remember at the moment the guy's name.
Okay.
Fat Tony Salerno.
Okay. Yeah, because there was an incident, too, on a Trump helicopter with Armand Della Croce waving around an Uzi machine gun on the helicopter.
Donald Trump has been surrounded by mobsters for decades. The Trump Tower was one of only 2 buildings in New York when it opened that would sell apartments to people without vetting them. So if you went to the building I have an apartment in and said, I want to buy this not in my name but the name of Snow Inc., they would say, well, what are you? Are you an Aspen ski lodge or are you a drug smuggler? Donald would simply say, oh, Snow Inc., sure, I want an extra $1 million.
Gotcha.
And so law enforcement knows that building very well. Interpol, British intelligence, the New York City Organized Crime Squad, the FBI. Boy, they have lots of people in that building they watch.
David Cay Johnston, I can't thank you enough, my friend. The Big Cheat, how Donald Trump fleeced America and enriched himself and his family. That's the latest book, man. I can't thank you so much for coming on the show. You really, really, I can't imagine anybody that knows more about this stuff than you do.
Thank you. Take care, Ed.
Thank you. Good night.